This is something that I think is really coming to a head now again after COVID. And then we all moved off-site, and that piece was gone, and all you were left with was whatever system you worked on all day, especially for the critical people, customer service representatives, people that are really in systems all day long. They're dealing directly with insureds. They felt disrespected by what they were forced to do in these workflows. And the workflows were built around the software and where the software limitation was. And then you finally convince them that insurance is cool and that it's going to be great and that you're a family. And then you pop them down and you make them do these horrifyingly long, arduous data entry type positions. And they're like, yeah, no thanks. Like, I'll go somewhere else where that's not my job, because that self-worth it feels lower on the totem pole. What are we asking people to do from 9 to 5? And does that feel respectful? And is it something that they're going to want to do with their day? Hi, my name is Margeaux Giles. I am the CEO of Irys, and this is the future of insurance.
Margeaux, it is really good to sit down with you. I've been finally got to meet you in person. That was very exciting.
I know.
And you came in on a helicopter. It was a big. So I know you're still taking some for that, but it was pretty cool. And it did have me feeling like an idiot sitting in traffic, getting back to the airport later. And it was like, I totally should have just done what she did. But that's not.
I want royalties from that company. I must have sent them
I would imagine
a social media contract.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what I do want to talk to you about is what you're building with Irys. But let's just get into first, like, who are you for those 3 people who don't know? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and how did you get into where you're at?
Yeah, so I come from like all the way down in the streets in insurance. And I think everybody kind of stumbles into insurance, and I am no exception to that. I did not that wasn't my life's ambition, right? But I stumbled in. I had left a company. I had exited my first company. I was very young, and we had a big insurance issue. So we were kind of a pre-Uber. And we had like vehicles and fleet vehicles. And there were, at that time before Uber, there was no concept of gig work, driving vehicles outside of taxi companies. So I had worked with that time. I think we were working with Mercury at putting together sort of a risk management package, a specialty program just for the company that I was running. And, I kind of it was really interesting. It was really hard problems to solve. It wasn't like, it was kind of getting your hands dirty. And so when I left that company, I kind of took that sort of sidestep into insurance and really got onto the commercial P&C side. And then worked my way up through CSR into operations, into tech, then sidestep again into technology. And really it took off from there. So I love that, because women's journey in insurance to me looks very different from a lot of men's who kind of take this sales route. And I took more of this non-linear path to Insurtech. So yeah, it's interesting.
And were you on the carrier side? Were you doing that through?
No, it's distribution. We were all an agency. Yeah, agency, independent agents in Florida. And so I met my husband and we got married, and we bought the agency from the owner that we were both working at, and then grew the agency from there. And so now we have, I think, 14 agencies sort of under our umbrella. Wow. With our partnerships that we have. And he's running the operations. I handed that over to him when I did the tech stuff, but kind of was born from this operation standpoint. We needed software. I had a certain set of KPIs that I wanted to hit. I wanted to 5x rev on the operation side. And I just couldn't find the technology that I really needed. And so got excited about, okay, I'm going to go build my own, which I think there's a lot of agencies and brokers that take that journey to building their own software. So that's interesting. That's kind of how I got here.
Well, and I think having been in the carrier and the carrier facing technology side of it, I think there's an easier sales path there, because one customer, while it's a hard customer to close, one customer, you can build your company off that. With agents, there's some big players and super entrenched, but I've seen all these really cool ideas, and they're but the distribution to sell into distribution, it's a lot of feet on the streets, pounding the pavement, because each sale is potentially very small.
Yeah.
And so it might be a great sale, but it's okay, now I got to go to the 10 other agents in this town and try to get, it's tough. So
it's a grassroots.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very I think the most successful people that have done that on the distribution side, especially on the tech technology distribution have been sort of community organizers, grassroots people that can get a following behind them, and then, and then kind of be the voice and lead the change. Because, especially independent agents, like we're kind of like every man for himself, right? Like we fight against each other for business. And so like bringing them all together under a common goal is difficult, because it's kind of like, well, this is mine and this is mine. And we're very siloed. And I think that changed after COVID. I think people realized, okay, well, now that we're global, so now that my agency isn't necessarily a neighborhood agency anymore, now it's a statewide or even multi-state, that whole idea of fighting against your neighbor kind of went out the window. And I think a lot of agency owners are embracing being more of a group, right? So that's interesting, because then once they unionize, right? Like once we come together as a group, the voice is a little stronger, the demands are become more solidified. And I think providing solutions for that is a lot easier than going individual to each one to provide like a custom solution.
Yeah. I don't think I ever really thought about the competitive aspect of the dynamic, and then like breaking through that. It's the
same with carriers. Like you're not like Travelers isn't going to go tell Hartford all their secret, rating. It's the same thing with agents and brokers.
So you've been living it firsthand
for a long time,
right? And seeing a need. So what specific, like let's move into Irys. Like what is it that you're building, and what was the problem?
So for like on the technical side, there's a lot of technical problems, and then there's, more theoretical problems. But technically, the biggest hurdle for me as an agency owner was I needed a central platform, and it doesn't have to do all the things, right? Like it doesn't need to be end to end, but I needed a place to land that was open so that I could take advantage of, all of the great solutions that were coming out, like Indio and Wonderwrite and all of these great sort of agent facing, glove box, like whatever it was. There's a lot of these great point solutions, and I had trouble adapting them in the agency because I didn't have sort of an arc or a platform for them all to land into. So it was like I had Salesforce for CRM, and then we had at that time applied Epic as what we would consider like a database, like our AMS database. And then we had, we wanted to use, like I said, Glovebox or Xylo. I think at the time we were looking. And every time I wanted to use one of those great solutions, I was making my users go outside of their workflow. So it was like I was creating all of these like siloed workflows. And even though we could make a whole plan from beginning to end, and they could hop from this screen and then hop in this screen, we did what we could to make it easy. But the data was siloed, right? And the build to bring data that lived in this system and this system and this system to aggregate it together so that we could do any kind of analytics, that became $1 million technology build for a for a small agency. And we weren't small, but we certainly weren't $1 million IT tech budget agency. And so at some point we just said like, okay, well, we have to go without. And then we started doing it, like we had a wish list, and then we had to dwindle down the wish list. And what ended up happening is we're barely getting by. And that was the standard to which that we would all have to adhere to. Like, does it work? Does it get us by? Okay, then that's good enough. And that's not good enough to compete with Brown and Brown, right? Like, it's just not as an agency. So that was the number one thing that when we went to build Irys was, can we build a platform that can do the core functionality of day-to-day, right? But also leaves room for other solutions to integrate with, that we as Irys are never going to be as good at building, right? Like I'm never going to be as good as NetSuite at general ledgering. It's, so why would I try to recreate that? And I think that was the key to Irys in the beginning, is microservice and API based.
I love that like recognizing that there are best of breed or people who are like, that's their bread and butter and they're really good at it and they will always be focused on it. I remember having a conversation with, it was a chief claims officer, and he was waiting for we were talking about all these little point solutions that were really good, but they weren't implementing any of them. And he's like, we're waiting for our core system provider to do it. And I was like, if they do, they're not going to be best in breed because they're trying to do 1,000 other things and this is not their main product. And B, they're never going to do it. And they're like open about that because that's not the model anymore. It's like you're saying, like you you're not going to build a Swiss Army knife because no one's going to buy that. They're going to buy each little tool and need a way to bring like the cohesiveness layer. Is that so?
And
is
I
that
think it's
kind of
UX UI. Yeah,
Yeah.
for us, it was, we structured it at a little more technical side where, you know, we have like the database layer and we have a smarts layer. And then at the top, we have UX UI and it can be used in conjunction. Like if you need an end-to-end AMS or, you know, it's not really an AMS, it's more than that. But if you need that solution, it's available, but it can also be used in other ways. So like people now are contacting Irys because we put so much time and energy into like usability and workflow and adoption and training, because those are big issues right now.
Yeah.
Like people are like, can we just like license your UX UI? And it's kind of like, sure, you sure can, you know, because on the back end, you can use our microservice to complete this task, or you can use anyone else's, you know, so you're right. I think that was sort of the key, which is we're not going to be the best at everything, and trying to build a platform that large and to get to market, it's a never ending build. It's years, decades of building. And we just couldn't hit that mark. So it was like, all right, well, let's be the anchor, let's be the rock. And then let's try to make an ecosystem around the rock that people can use. So yeah.
So it's really like a easy connectivity story then for those tools. So like API, cloud-based, all the good things people
all the buzzwords. Yeah. So let's talk about, because this is good. Let's talk about buzzwords for a minute, because I was going to go on a whole rant today about this because it really bothered me, because we're at Irys, we're trying to do this, you know, we're going out and becoming a brand, and we're sort of in that phase. And, you know, we're talking about what do we do and how do we describe it? And we're using words like, you know, digital immersion and 360-degree view of the customer and open connectivity. And it feels like it's falling, like it's white noise, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at the systems that use this marketing language, and you're like, this is absolutely not open connect. It's not even cloud-based. It's like in the cloud. And you're like, well, no, we're not cloud-based. You're like, okay, so how does the new technology that is coming to the market that truly does some of these things, like how do we break through with this language barrier, you know?
Because the words have been ruined.
It's been ruined. They have, and actually they're almost like negative associations sometimes, right? I heard one the other day, the 360 digital customer view, and it was like, we have a 360 digital customer view, and you can finally see policies from both P&C and benefits. And I'm like, is that 360 degree of customer, you know, viability?
There's only two aspects of your customer.
There's two aspects here. Like, it's like, I don't know if that qualifies, but the language has been used so many times. And on the distribution side, like we've been burned a bunch with that kind of language. And then you get something and it's delivered and it's just nothing like the marketing material. So how do you break through that? How do you show people that, you know, the difference between the fancy words and the actual technology? That's tough. That's an education play.
So all I can think about is like recruiting. Like everyone gets that we're a caring meritocracy and our people are a product and people first and our culture.
We're a family.
Yeah, we're like, it's really like a family here.
And you're like,
and I think like half of them just know they're lying. The other half think they're telling the truth. And of them, like a small percentage may actually be telling the truth, but how do you discern that? And I think like we're all jaded to it now. So or worse, right? It's like, oh my God, they said like caring meritocracy, run, because they're totally the opposite.
Yeah, like open connectivity is a big one right now. It's for all of Insurtech. It's like, we have an open platform, and I see it a lot because my job is to go vet partners that we can kind of build it. And so I go, great, you have an open platform. That's what we're looking for. Show me.
Right.
And they're like, well, and you're like, come on, man.
Well, it's like when you talk about spreading the word and kind of the marketing burden of it, like, so using hashtags, not like you have a presence, you've built a following, and I think that predates Irys, but maybe not.
It does.
Like,
It was a long time in the making.
Yeah.
Still don't know why anybody wants to hear what I have to say about this stuff, but here we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, for any of us, right? Like, why is anyone listening to insurance stuff? But there's like, I feel like it's coming of age now. Like there is people are paying attention. And I think part of it is like, to your point about being jaded, is like, we would love someone to tell us the truth and give us inspiration and show us what's possible. And I, like, you've been out there, like, you haven't said anything offensive, but like, you're not afraid to call stuff out. You're not afraid to push people or be like, this is my view. What do you think? And I've seen like just some awesome, and like, we've disagreed on stuff, but you've gotten some really good discussions, debates going. You know, I'm only on LinkedIn really, like maybe on TikTok too, but I haven't seen it. Because
LinkedIn's are my format. I haven't really moved to Twitter or Facebook yet. Facebook a little bit, but yeah, I think that discussion, like, I think LinkedIn too LinkedIn for a long time felt like a place to go and be like, humble brag.
Yeah.
Look at my resume and look at this award I won. And then it's really morphing to having more serious discussion around business culture and practice.
Yeah.
And so I think tapping into that was part of what made that successful.
And do you see that as tied to that burden that you talked about for Irys to like overcome the buzzwords that people are, or like, would you be doing this anyway? Like, because to me, like, you were already engaging like that, but I see how they could overlap.
Yeah. Now, I mean, so the theories and the things that I've seen working through tech before, because I did, about 6 years of consulting in Insurtech, and I actually worked on some of the carrier side stuff and the distribution side. So, but I was always very behind the curtain, quiet. I was a worker, like I was a doer. And I got to see that. But I think, I just developed really strong opinions, and I felt like the voice and the tone was very bubblegum, like digital transformation. It goes so great. And then what I was experiencing was like chaos. Like if you really went behind the scenes at any of these like huge implementations of new software or core system changes or API building, it was like the house was on fire. Everyone was running around. Nothing was getting done. And it was just such a stark difference for me from what I was seeing online about how important it was and how great it was to what was actually happening in real life.
I came off a conference and shared a cab with a friend back to the airport, and he runs claims for a carrier, and he was just like, depressed is too strong a word, but he was dismayed and downtrodden. And I was like, what? Like, he's just like, everyone else is so far ahead of us. And because he'd been like spent 3 days watching people on stage talk about how perfect what they're doing is, and the ROI is great, and everyone's happy, and it's
terrible.
And I was like, let me just tell you, like, that's what you see on stage. That's not the way it's actually going. And he's like, really? It's like, yeah, they're like, they struggle, they're over budget, they're under scope, all of it. They're just, who's willing to go on stage and say that?
Hey, I paid a whole bunch of money to come on stage and tell you how great what we're doing is, but let me tell you like the dumpster fire that it actually, that's all social media. Right. And it's good to an extent because we want to see like the possibilities. You don't want to cut down the big thinking and like what we could do. And that's really key. But I just always had a problem with the language around, that these things are smooth, that I always get so pissed when, when I'm hearing tech or I'm getting pitched something and they're like, yeah, you'll be up and running in 2-3 days or 2-3 months. And you're just like, come on, like, this is so unrealistic. Give me the real, like, tell me the real things, because at our agency, we did a digital transformation right early on, and we got caught up in something very similar where it was like, we got promised the world and it was going to be great. And then we get into implementation and it went $50,000 over budget, $70,000 over budget. And when you're in a company that's not a multi-billion-dollar company, that type of disruption and unplanned either time loss or monetary loss of revenue, like all of that could have really put us out a bit, like realistically, like especially some of the AMS system, like you can't operate your business if that's not functioning correctly. And you could put someone out of business by doing that. And so I was like almost enraged at that process when I went through it, that I would have much rather have you told me, this is the possibility, this is the best case scenario, this is the worst case, plan for somewhere in the middle. And I could have prepped myself for that, as opposed to just selling me something and then hoping that I don't fall off because I've invested so much that you're just going to push it through, which is a lot of what happens.
And I'm sure there are people who are like, oh, it's only 50, 70,000. if you're like a 10-person or 12-person agency,
Yeah.
that's easily an FT. Like that's a person who you
The whole
now have
person.
to let go, or the principals are like, we're just not going to eat for 6 months. Like
Or you go out and borrow, like whatever you
or
have
you
to do,
borrow,
because
right?
yeah, what you're doing, I mean, and that was over budget. So we had a large, but it wasn't, that's what
Right. You're
I'm
already
talking
spending something. It wasn't zero.
it wasn't zero, right?
Right.
And now we're doubling, or tripling in some cases what we initially intended to spend. And there comes, when you're doing the digital transformation like this, like there comes a point of no return.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, we do this, we're talking to a lot of big agencies right now about Irys and sort of how they can utilize what we've done. And a lot of them are like, we have spent so much money on this thing. And I'm like, well, does it work? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, like, when is it going to be done? We're not sure. I'm like, and so we're just going to keep going. And that mentality, because you do get to a point where you're like, we've done so much, invested so much, it feels like we can't stop.
Yeah.
Even if the solution is bad, like even if
Yeah.
that it's dead in the water,
That's why people stay in bad relationships.
the same thing.
You feel like you can't get out of it. You just got to put a little bit more in.
Yeah.
So like how do we, and this is a bigger question than just on the system side, but there's so many instances of exactly what you're describing holding the industry back. Like the way we've been working isn't working for us, but that new thing, that's very scary. We can't do that because that's not how we did it. Or like, we're already this deep, how, like, we can't move on to something else. Like really, because that's a sunk cost. And technically you're not supposed to consider sunk costs in any strategic decision you make, but that's your whole
Mhm.
justification for not being willing to change. It's the thing you're not
Yeah.
supposed to be considering. How do we, and I think probably the burden on you is like, how are you helping when you go to talk about Irys to an agency or to, potential partner? How do you help them to move past this sort of mindset that's locked the industry in, or how do you think about that?
So we do two things. One, that the construction of Irys being microservice based means that we don't have to pitch a full rip and replace for
Yeah.
us to provide value, right? So for us, it's almost like our mentality is sort of put your money where your mouth is. We say that we built something that's better, significantly better than what you're using today, and we'll show you, whether it's revamping a COI interface or, changing the way that you're tracking submissions or you're prospecting or cross-selling, whatever that microservice is, we're saying like, we'll put up, like, we're going to show you that it works and that it's better than what you're doing. And we're going to kind of hold your hand through that. And then, now that we've proven that, I don't want to hear that excuse anymore because we've overcome that already. Right. But we didn't have to do it on such a large scale that it's this massive cumbersome process that no matter how good we are, a rip and replace is what that is always a situation.
Yeah.
There's nobody perfect in that scenario, but we don't have to go full in to provide value. And then once we show that value, then we have your data, you've migrated it, you're using our microservice. Now it's just adding additional workflows, and that's been successful for us.
It's like, it's not death by 1,000 cuts. It's like life or birth. I
Life,
don't know.
life by 1,000.
Life by 1,000 cuts. You don't hear that so much.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's like you prove it to them. You take something that's manageable and frankly, like, even if you were perfect, getting into like rip and replace on something really big, it's like doing renovate. Like when you open up the walls and you find out that, the pipe's been leaking for years and there's mold in there, like that doesn't matter how good you are, you still got to deal with that.
Yeah. They're like, we're doing a data migration. We're like, cool. Where's your data? They're like, in these PDFs. And you're like, what? Like it's that kind of stuff that you find when you get in there.
Right. That's not data, that's information.
Yeah.
It's
a document.
Right.
It's definitely not
But
data.
at least it's not paper. I guess that's what they're like. Hey, we digitized everything. No, you haven't.
You scanned it in and put it in Dropbox. Yes.
Right. It's as image files. I want to ask you a bit more broadly, kind of looking forward at the industry and, especially as a younger leader, someone who's been pushing people to think differently and to try to do better and more, something we desperately need in the industry. We talk about the retirement cliff, and like, I'm trying not to throw out buzzwords, but I think everything could have a hashtag, the graying of the industry or whatever, but like that is extremely real. It's it's already happening. Like we've been talking about in 5 years, X% will be retired. It's like, yeah, we've been talking about that for 5 years. So we're here.
It's already here. It's like,
right.
I think it's something like 60% or some massive number.
It's such a big number. You think the number must be wrong, but it's not. And it's playing out now. And so that's really difficult. And at the same time, it's hard to bring new, younger people into the industry. And frankly, I don't think we've necessarily treated them terribly well, because it's not an industry built for holding up like the new talent. It's very much been a like, well, you got to do your time and you prove yourself. And like, well, I went through this, so you have to too. And like tenure is seen as skill, and may not be. So how do you think about kind of the future of the industry and the prospects for us, given that like talent's a major issue? We don't have a history of engaging future talent well. I'm throwing a lot out, but like just curious your take kind of watching it.
Yeah, and it is another core pillar of what we built on Irys, which was adoption, training, and then the respect that your software shows your employees. And this is something that I think is really coming to a head now, again, after COVID, where everybody was like in office. And so culture was surrounding maybe in-person events or coffee at the water cooler. Like that was a lot of people's day. And then we all moved, off site. And that piece was gone. And all you were left with was whatever system you worked on all day. Like that was your interaction with your company. And we had a lot of feedback when we started doing research on UX UI, which was, it felt, especially for the critical people, customer service representatives, people that are really in systems all day long. They're dealing directly with insureds, and they're really the ones that are interacting the most, underwriting, claims management on the carrier side. But on the distribution side, it was a lot of that customer service, and they felt disrespected by what they were forced to do in these workflows. So and a lot of it goes towards, well, the senior, account executive did this on paper, right? And so therefore I'm forced to do it on paper because I have to work with this senior account executive. That's the only way they'll accept this information. They don't want to go into a new system. So there were these rigid sort of workflows, and the workflows were built around the software and where the software limitation was. Like the software can't do X, therefore now I have a workaround to do it. And then you bring them in and you tell them, you finally convince them that insurance is cool and that it's going to be great and that you're a family. And then you pop them down and you make them do these like horrifyingly long, arduous data entry type positions. And they're like, yeah, no, thanks. Like I'll go somewhere else where I don't, like, that's not my job, because that self-worth it feels lower on the totem pole. And so, we what we did was kind of look at it like, how can software do things like, train a CSR to become an agent, right? To give them coverage, to teach them how coverage works so that they can, advance in their career. How do we get rid of unconscious bias, right? Like if we're talking about how we're measuring someone's work ethic, or how we're measuring the KPIs that are surrounding things like how much they did today, or what impact they had on customers. A lot of times we're looking at things like, how many phone calls did they answer? Does that really tell the story? You know what I'm saying about that? And are we promoting some people because they do this, look busy and they answer the phones a lot, but they're not really delivering the service level that we need? Like, how do we change the mindset and the KPIs that we're looking at so that we can get rid of that kind of bias? And that is going to be software. I mean, it's in 2023, 2030, like that's software. That's not manual process. So I think that's kind of one or two of the ways that we can look at how technology can assist that, outside of just how do we retain talent? How do we get talent? How do we hire HR? But then what are we asking people to do from 9 to 5?
Yeah.
And is that feel respectful? And is it something that they're going to want to do with their day?
I don't think I've ever heard the word respect used with thinking about what the software, the tools, the processes are giving to the user. Yeah. It was just sort of like, well, it's what you got to use. And it's like, well.
And the user's like, well.
Yeah.
No. and they don't really have a voice. So, but that's the whole point of user experience, right? Is that we're supposed to be focusing on what gets them through the day, not just so that a manager can look at a spreadsheet of performance, but so that they can feel fulfilled in their work, that they feel that they're contributing in some way, that they feel they're moving up through the company, that they have goals that they get, like all that stuff. There's tons of software out there right now that we've been looking at, which is like goal setting, not just for sales, but like, hey, when you reach this milestone, like we'll take you to get this new certification, right? And we'll pay for it. And then once you have this certification, here's your path. And if that's worked into the software that they're using and they're seeing those reminders every day and they're getting closer to that goal, like that's psychological motivation. And that shows somebody that you actually care about their personal growth within the company. That is such a foreign concept in insurance. Like I get like crazy eyes when I start talking about it, because people are like, wow, we never even thought about that. But if you're going to train and retain like Gen X, I mean, you better start thinking about it, because they're not putting up with it anymore.
I just hear such a like true production mindset, and not in a traditional sense of like you just got to grind it out and get stuff from people, but like that's an asset of ours. How do we get the most out of them, and how we get them to want to give the most? And that's how you get like the best performance from anyone, is when they're inherently wishing to perform at their best.
And it's not just sales. Like we kind of dip into that in sales. Like there's some stuff around that I've seen in insurance that kind of focuses on that, like, the race to the top and some of the stuff that you can do. But what about all the other people? What about people that are interfacing on a daily basis with all of your insureds, right? With all of your clients? Like, what do you think their output is to an insured if they don't love their job and they're not passionate about it, and they don't care? I mean, we've all experienced that kind of customer service on any carrier.
It shows.
It shows.
We could go for a long time. It was there's a bunch of points that you made that are just, I hope people are kind of stopping me and like, why are we thinking about it the way we have been? Whether it's systems or people, or the way we're thinking about our business or the industry more broadly. So thank you so much for what you shared today.
Yeah. Anytime.
It was fun to get to sit down with Margeaux. Like I said, we've seen each other in person now, but we still haven't like sat down. Great conversations on LinkedIn. But it's just good to hear more about not just what she's building and what they're doing with Irys, but kind of the mentality behind it and what they're trying to solve for. And if you listen, it's a solution in the agent channel that's real specific, and maybe it doesn't apply to you, but she's talking about so much more than that. She's talking about a mindset. She's talking about how to think differently to push the industry forward, and to have these moments where we get to question the way we've been doing it, where we've gotten stuck, and asking, well, how could we get past that? And what should we be looking for in the solutions that we have, that we give to our people, or that we use ourselves? This notion of whether the software is respecting the employee and what they're trying to achieve. I've never heard anyone say it like that. And that really, really struck me. So excellent points. Thank you to Margeaux for giving up some of her time to share with all of you, and to the team at Irys and their agency, losing her for a little bit to sit down and share everything with all of you. Super valuable. If you found value in this and you think the show is worth something to you, that's fantastic. Respect your peers and share the show with them. The way that we move this industry forward is to continue to share ideas, new ways of thinking, things that challenge us, that get us to pause and question what's going on. And that only happens when someone and trust gives you a little insight. Hey, check this out. This might be something that could help with what you're going through, what you're thinking about, the work you're doing. So share the show. Tell people to go to future-of-insurance.com. It's a link to podcasts, and they can get it right there. All the episodes, and of course, it's on all the podcast apps and platforms out there: Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, Amazon, Google, like whatever. It's everywhere. But thank you so much for listening, and I will see you back next time. Thanks, everyone.